If you knew your loved one was being hunted, where would you run? Dive deep into the sea or escape to land? Once upon a time, beneath the shimmering waves of the Atlantic Ocean near Cape Coast, where the voice of the sea carries the sacred spirit of hundreds of years of history, there lay an underwater kingdom called Azura. Here, Queen Ayana, a mermaid with dazzling golden scales, reigned with legendary beauty and hands capable of healing any wound. To her people, she was the symbol of light, until darkness arrived from within her own family. Prince Malik, her elder brother, whose heart was steeped in ambition, sought to seize the crown at all costs, even if it meant destroying a fragile life yet to be born. And in that very moment, Ayana understood the ocean was no longer safe. The sky over Charleston that day seemed to be draped in a copper-burnished scarf of autumn. The surface of the Seneca River shimmered, reflecting the sunset stretched out like a ribbon of silk. But beneath those gentle waves ran a story in fierce current, a flight that even the ocean itself could not hide. Ayana swam in silence, each measured sweep of her golden-scaled tail casting a faint halo beneath the water's surface. She had left behind the opulent coral palace of Azura, abandoned the songs of the radiant reefs and the briny scent of ceremonial gatherings beneath the sea. In her arms, the tiny baby girl slept soundly, her face serene as if she had never known danger, but her warmth was the only flame keeping Ayana steadfast in the cold expanse of the ocean. She had swum for miles, crossing frigid currents, evading the shadows she knew to be Malik's agents, ones who would not stop until this child ceased to exist. The sea breeze skimmed over the water, mingling with the waves like whispered warnings. Ayana understood her time was running out, and the mouth of the Seneca where ocean met land was the threshold between two worlds. On the shore, Imani was bent over a wooden tub, scooping water in preparation for dinner. The day's last light brushed over her bronze-brown skin, turning each droplet dripping from the wooden ladle into flecks of gold. Imani knew the rhythm of life by the river. Tranquil mornings when mist still clung to the water, afternoons heavy with the scent of fresh fish from the docks, and quiet evenings beside her father, old Ezekiel, a man bound to the sea all his life, yet determined to keep her away from its tempests. She stood at the doorway of a future already laid out for her. Darius, her fiancé, was the pride of the family, young, accomplished, refined. Everyone believed this marriage would be the key to happiness, lifting Imani from a simple life into a world of abundance. She believed it too, until fate rose from beneath the water. A strange ripple caught her eye. At first, Imani thought it was just the reflection of sunset on the river's surface. But then, from the place where water and light intertwined, a figure began to emerge. Long, gleaming hair, each strand seeming to be woven from the day's final rays, and below, dazzling golden scales, every gentle stroke sending 1,000 shimmering sparks dancing through the water. Ayana surfaced, her deep eyes reflecting the first stars flickering in the evening sky. In her arms, the baby girl still slept, lips softly pressed together, unaware that her world was about to change forever. In that moment, without a single word spoken, Imani felt the weight of it all. Before her was not just a legendary being her father had spoken of on stormy nights. This was the embodiment of a story no ordinary person would dare dream. Ayana's eyes held no trace of strangeness. Instead, they carried a silent plea, an unspoken cry for help. The wind slipped through the trees along the bank, carrying with it the salt and tang of seaweed, a reminder to Imani that this was no ordinary evening. For reasons she couldn't name, her heart trembled, part fear, part an irresistible pull to step closer. Ayana stepped slowly onto the wet sand where the tide had just receded, leaving dark, glistening outlines. Though seawater still dripped from her hair and her golden scales, she radiated the regal bearing of one who had once sat upon a throne. The air seemed to still, leaving only the sound of Imani's heartbeat echoing in her ears. No words were needed, the image carved itself into Imani's mind. A mother carrying her child, fleeing the shadows, seeking a safe haven in an unfamiliar world. Worry, pride, resolve, all of it was etched into Ayana's gaze. In the distance, the sun touched the horizon, turning the entire Seneca River into a sheet of amber red. The moment felt as if it were framed in memory, a moment Imani would never forget, and one that would alter the course of her life. Why would a queen of the ocean appear here, before an ordinary girl on the riverbank? And why was there, in her arms, a baby as fragile as a drop of dew on a flower's petal? Imani did not yet know it, but just one step forward, and she would enter a story from which there would be no turning back. So, are you ready to follow me further, to uncover the secret the waters of the Seneca have just delivered to shore? Very well, my dear viewers, brace yourselves for a journey filled with magic, intrigue, and choices that can change the course of fate. Hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where and when you're watching so the whole world can connect. That night, the wind blew fiercely, carrying the tang of salt and the pounding roar of waves against the shore, as if intent on sweeping away the fragile peace still lingering in Imani's heart. The decision she had just made on the banks of the Seneca River would not only alter the fate of a child, it would overturn the entire trajectory of her own life. Zahara's eyes, when held close, innocent, trusting and fragile, had etched themselves deep into Imani's heart, compelling her onto a path her reason could not stop. When the front door swung open, a rush of cold air swept in. Darius stood there, his face as hard as steel. Without a greeting, his gaze went straight to the thin blanket, wrapped around a tiny figure. The air grew dense, compressed, as if ready to shatter. Silence stretched, and then a short, decisive sentence fell, like the edge of a blade. "Take it back." Uncle Ezekiel entered, and the gentle light that usually shone in his eyes was gone. Sternness and disappointment merged into a judgment that left no room for negotiation. To him, family was something to be preserved, within clear boundaries, and that strange child, though only a day old in Imani's life, had already broken every plan he had set for his daughter. Imani heard every word, but it was as though a wall had risen between her and them. The sounds grew distant, replaced by the rhythm of her own heartbeat and the faint breaths of Zahara. She knew that any hesitation would mean abandoning the baby to a cruel fate, and so, in one decisive moment, she chose a road from which there was no return. The door closed behind her, cutting off not only her father's and fiancé's voices, but also the thread that tied her to the shelter she had once called home. Her feet stepped onto the damp ground of a Charleston night rain, each falling drop seeming to extinguish the last flicker of hope. The familiar street became strange. The glow of the street lamps casting the shadows of mother and child across the vast emptiness of a sleeping city. They wandered until nearly dawn, finding a patch of abandoned ground near the seafood market. The smell of fish, the scent of seaweed, and the drip of rain from a rusted tin roof blended into a soundtrack for the first night of their new life. There was no bed, only a few sheets of cardboard laid on the ground. No home, only a makeshift shelter pieced together from hastily nailed boards. But in the midst of all that lack, Imani's arms remained the warmest place Zahara could be. When the first light of morning spilled down, harsh reality came into focus. Imani had nothing in her possession but an empty cloth bag and a baby who needed to be fed. Hunger would not wait, and pride could not feed a child. Her steps carried her to the bustling seafood market. The smell of fresh shrimp and fish mingled with the cries of vendors, the voices of bargaining customers, and the sound of waves lapping against the harbor. Imani held Zahara against her chest, her eyes on the stalls laden with food, her heart tightening. For the first time in her life, she reached out not to receive something she had bought, but to beg for a bit of food. Some looked at her with pity, quietly pressing a few coins into her hand. Others placed a still warm piece of bread in her palm. Still others simply shook their heads and turned away, as if her presence were a crease marring the lively morning scene. Every glance, every gesture, imprinted itself in her memory, a reminder of her precarious place in this world. Hundreds of miles away, deep beneath the sea, Ayana stood before the ancient glass mirror, a treasured relic of the kingdom of Azura. One by one, images appeared in sharp clarity. Imani in the market, hair tousled by the wind, her hands trembling as she received the bread. Zahara stirring in her arms, her tiny lips seeking warmth. Ayana's tears fell, merging into the waves. Each drop was a word of self-reproach. Each drop, a silent promise. She knew she had placed the weight of two worlds on the shoulders of a human girl. Yet within her sorrow, a faint thread of trust remained. Imani had not abandoned Zahara, even when turning away would have been the easier path. And that alone made Ayana believe that, whatever the cost, they would survive together. But Ayana also knew the tragedy was only just beginning. That night, Charleston lay beneath the still veil of the night wind and the distant sound of waves. The abandoned plot where Imani and Zahara had taken shelter was still damp from the afternoon rain. Wind slipped through the gaps of the hastily patched hut, carrying the scent of sea salt and the musty tang of moisture. Imani stepped inside slowly, her legs weary after a long day wandering the market. On her back, Zahara slept soundly, her breathing as steady as the ocean's lullaby. Moonlight pierced through the torn fabric overhead, scattering into mottled patches on the ground. And there, right in the dim pool of light, lay something she had never seen before. A large leather bag, worn yet sturdy, as if it had traveled through countless distant journeys. Imani knelt, her hands touching the coarse surface. The bag was heavier than she expected. When she opened it, a flood of golden light spilled into the dark space. Gold bars, coins, and crisp banknotes still fragrant with fresh ink. The gleam didn't just illuminate the hut. It lit the fogged recesses of Imani's mind. No words were needed, her heart already knew the source of this gift. Gratitude welled up, mingled with a tremor of realization that Ayana was still watching, still keeping her promise. Magic was never something she believed in, but in that moment, every trace of doubt dissolved like foam on the tide. The next morning, the sunlight felt fresher, and the harbor wind carried a sweetness in its salt that it hadn't before. Imani gathered everything, leaving the damp hut without looking back. She found a small house in a neighborhood by the harbor, where a glance out the window met the sight of ships docking and the sound of seagulls calling to each other from the red-tiled rooftops. From the gold she had left, she began a dream she had never dared to imagine. Imani rented a small stall on a busy street, opening a craft shop specializing in jewelry made from seashells, pearls, and gemstones found along the shore. Her skilled hands and discerning eye transformed ordinary materials into exquisite pieces, each carrying the breath of the ocean and the character of Charleston. Word of the shop spread faster than the crash of waves. People came not only for the beauty of the pieces, but for the story of the shop's owner, a young mother with a warm smile, always carrying a little girl as lovely as an angel by the counter. Every item sold seemed to carry the sincerity of the hands that made it. In just a few months, Imani's shop was no longer an anonymous corner. Tourists from all over stopped by to buy, and local merchants placed bulk orders. The gold she thought would soon be gone seemed instead like a hidden spring that never ran dry. Her income grew, and with it, the community's respect. Charleston began to know Imani in a new light, not as the poor girl cast out from her home, but as a self-reliant, resilient, and accomplished woman. On sunny afternoons when the harbor streets glowed, she would throw her shop doors wide open so Zahara's laughter could spill into the street. Yet beneath the surface of these newly budding, peaceful days, Imani understood that it had all begun with a mysterious gift, a gift that was not just salvation, but a bond tying her to another world. Ayana was no longer present before her eyes, but her presence lingered in every coin, every pearl, and in the way Zahara's gaze would sometimes drift toward the sea. At times, in rare moments when the streets were quiet, Imani would stand by the window, looking out over the vast ocean. She would wonder whether, beneath those blue waves, Ayana was watching or facing dangers she could not imagine, and whether this gift of pure gold was the beginning of a lasting miracle or merely a brief breath before the storm returned. On Zahara's young face, Imani saw both the question and the answer she could not yet reach. But she knew one thing for certain. Since that day on the banks of the Seneca River, their fates had been bound by a thread no force could ever sever. That summer in Charleston was as radiant as a postcard, and it was also the time when Zahara began painting the picture of her own youth. The harbor street where the briny scent of salt mingled with the sweetness of pastries from the corner shop became the stage for days she would never forget. Zahara, with a smile as bright as sunrise over the bay, stepped into her teenage years carrying all the innocence in the world and a heart larger than the ocean itself. At school, in the long hallways washed in the pale gold light of early morning, she met Naomi, a girl with hair as smooth and flowing as a midnight river, the daughter of a well-off family. Naomi always carried the scent of fresh books and the easy confidence of someone accustomed to being sheltered. But beneath the polished exterior was a yearning for a friendship unmeasured by status or wealth. Zahara, with her unvarnished sincerity, became the friend Naomi never thought she would find. Then came Selah, a girl with bright eyes whose light was often dimmed by the weariness and dust of endless chores in her stepmother's home. Living in a place where shouting replaced morning greetings, Selah had learned to survive by staying silent. But when Zahara and Naomi pulled her into their small circle, she experienced for the first time what it felt like to be truly seen and heard. The three quickly became the undefeated trio, a name Naomi coined, half in jest, half in earnest, yet one that bound them together like an unspoken oath. On afternoons, they wandered along the harbor, collecting seashells, laughing until their sides hurt over the silliest stories. Sometimes they sat on the stone steps, watching cargo ships depart, imagining themselves traveling the world. Zahara had a special sensitivity towards Selah. Perhaps it was because she recognized that behind her friend's tentative smile was an entire world starved for affection. From time to time, Zahara would quietly slip a sweet bun or a few small bills into Selah's pocket, treating them as gifts that needed no occasion. These gestures were not grand, but to Selah they were rare, precious pieces of kindness. Naomi, with her comfortable upbringing, didn't always grasp the feeling of lacking, but she understood the value of loyalty. That was why she would step in to shield her friends when they were bullied at school or challenge a teacher if she sensed someone was being treated unfairly. Their friendship was like a rope tightly woven from 3 strands, each a different color, each from a different beginning, yet all pulling toward the same warmth they found in one another. Secrets, dreams, and fears were all shared during long walks along the beach at sunset. From a distance, Imani watched Zahara shine among her 2 friends. Her heart lightened. After years of hardship, her daughter had found a safe circle, a place where she could grow without feeling alone. But deep inside, Imani carried a vague, lingering fear that the bond tethering Zahara to the world beneath the sea might one day pull her far from everything she had now. And while on the surface, these were only the peaceful days of 3 teenage girls, beneath the currents, the story was quietly gathering the energy for an unforeseen turning point. Do you believe a friendship can be strong enough to hold someone when destiny is calling them to another place? My dear viewers, stay tuned for the next chapter that will leave you in awe. Take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all corners of the world. That afternoon, the sunset cast a warm, mellow hue over Charleston, like golden honey swirling inside a glass jar. Imani sat on the porch, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sea and sky met. The salty breeze drifted gently through her hair, carrying with it old memories she had long tried to bury. The image of her father, old Ezekiel, appeared vividly. A man with hands calloused from years adrift at sea, a voice warm yet guided by firm principles. Memories of the day she had been cast out of her home came rushing back, but this time they no longer carried resentment. Instead, there was a quiet sense of understanding. She realized her father had never despised her. He had only feared that his daughter might lose her chance at a secure life by choosing a path filled with risk and uncertainty. In his way of loving, firmness sometimes took precedence over tenderness. That night, Imani lay awake. She thought of the years her father had raised her alone after her mother's passing, of the humble meals that had always been filled with love. She knew she had grown, and it was time to close the cold distance between them. The next morning, with dew still clinging to the rooftops, Imani set out with Zahara for her old neighborhood. The small house she had grown up in still sat quietly along the familiar alley, its green-painted door now faded. She stepped onto the porch and knocked lightly. The door opened, and there was old Ezekiel. For a split second, his eyes widened in surprise, then softened, heavy with unspoken emotion. Imani said nothing, only stepped forward to embrace her father. His arms wrapped tightly around her, trembling slightly as if afraid to lose her again. Their tears mingled, washing away the misunderstandings and silences that had once divided them. When they finally sat down in the small room, surrounded by the scent of aged wood and the familiar fragrance of mint tea, Imani spoke gently. There was no reproach in her voice, only the tone of someone releasing a long-held breath after a storm. She forgave her father, and she wanted him to live the rest of his years in happiness. In the days that followed, Imani began turning that wish into reality. She chose a spacious piece of land overlooking the sea and built a comfortable, airy home where the mornings brought the sound of waves and the evenings welcomed the cool breeze from the open waters. She gave her father not just a new house, but a chance to begin again. Fate, as if conspiring to mend what had once been broken, brought another surprise. At a community gathering, old Ezekiel met a kind-hearted woman with warm eyes and a laugh like the morning Sunday. Their connection came naturally, and before long, they decided to commit to each other. Imani took charge of organizing the wedding, sparing no effort or expense. The ceremony was held by the sea, with white ribbons dancing in the wind and waves keeping time with the music. Watching her father hold the hand of his new bride, his smile brighter than the sunlight on the water, Imani felt an immense lightness in her heart. The empty spaces of years past had been filled with joy and forgiveness. She knew that although life still held many unknowns, her family had found its way back to each other. That night, as they returned home, Zahara clung to her mother. Her eyes shone with the simple happiness, the happiness of a family healed. And somewhere, deep beneath the water, perhaps Ayana was smiling too, watching the bond of blood be tied again by love. Imani's life now was fuller than it had ever been, but what made the harborfront house truly warm was not the sturdy walls or the fine furnishings, it was the warmth of love. Each morning, the aroma of toasted bread mingled with the scent of coffee, drifting through the kitchen as sunlight poured in through the wide window, spilling across Zahara's radiant face. She grew up in her mother's loving arms, amid family meals and laughter sparked by simple stories. Imani had built for her daughter a world where kindness was the greatest wealth, even though Zahara had never known that the blood of the ocean and the throne ran in her veins. The friendship between Zahara, Naomi, and Selah was as steadfast as the wave-break stones along the harbor. Naomi brought brightness and optimism, but it was Selah whom Zahara felt most compelled to protect. Selah lived in a house without laughter, where each day began with orders and ended with sighs. Her strict stepmother made sure every household chore fell on the girl's shoulders, from scrubbing floors to cooking meals. yet never offered her praise or a single embrace. Zahara understood what it felt like to be placed in situations you never chose. In Sela's quiet sadness, she saw echoes of the stories her mother Imani sometimes told about cold, rainy days and the fear of being left alone. So whenever she saw Sela lower her head after a scolding, Zahara would gently sit beside her and whisper a few comforting words. Sometimes she would sneak into the kitchen to wrap up a pastry for her friend. At other times, she would slip a few small bills into Sela's coat pocket, a secret just between the two of them. Sela didn't always accept, but when she did, her eyes would shine a little brighter, and her smile, though fragile, was enough to let Zahara know she'd done the right thing. The care Zahara gave never needed to be repaid in kind. It was instinct, the natural impulse of a heart untouched by selfishness. Imani had often witnessed such moments from afar. She never intervened, only smiled quietly to herself. In her heart, she knew her daughter had inherited the most precious thing of all, not property or skill, but a heart that could see and reach into the pain of others. Every weekend, the three girls explored the harbor together. They wandered past craft stalls, tasted cotton candy, and took photos beside docked ships. On some days, they strolled along the beach at sunset, letting the waves lap at their feet, letting the wind carry away sad stories. In those moments, Zahara felt the world was big enough to hold all three of them, yet small enough that they could never lose each other. And yet, somewhere amid those peaceful days, a faint unease would sometimes slip into Imani's thoughts. She knew Zahara's past did not belong entirely here, that there was an invisible thread tying her to another world, one deep beneath the salt water that Imani herself had never set foot in. She told herself she would do everything she could to keep this life whole, yet she also knew there were great waves no one could hold back. As for Zahara, she felt nothing of that thread. In her eyes, Sela and Naomi were an extended family, the missing pieces that made her youth complete. Perhaps it was because she didn't know that every promise she made to Sela one day, will be free, came from a place of pure belief, a belief that the future needed nothing more than friendship and courage. On afternoons, when the three sat at the harbor watching the sunset, Zahara would often close her eyes, letting the wind thread through her hair and the rhythm of the waves seep into her. In those brief moments, if one looked closely enough, they might catch a flicker of gold in her eyes like a glimmer from somewhere deep, trying to find its way home. Do you believe that sometimes the things we give without expecting anything in return can become the greatest strength when the storms arrive? That morning, dawn slipped into Zahara's room in strands of golden light, as gentle as fingers turning the page of a new book. Her 18th birthday began not with the laughter of friends or her mother's wishes, but with something strange quietly taking shape in the mirror. When her gaze met her own reflection, the world seemed to slow. The familiar deep black of her pupils was gone, replaced by a brilliant gold, clear as the sunrise breaking over the ocean's surface. The color was so vivid it seemed to glow from within, at once beautiful and terrifying. Zahara stood frozen, her breath quickening. She raised a hand to touch her eyelids, as if to test whether this was only a trick of the light. But the gold remained proud, unyielding, and unfading. A rush of unease rose inside her, mingled with something she couldn't name, as though a part of her that had never been awakened had just opened its eyes. She raced down the stairs, heart pounding, heading for the one place she believed would give her answers. Imani was in the kitchen, the sound of chopping and the scent of cinnamon bread filling the air. When Zahara stepped in, sunlight from the window fell directly across her face, making the gold in her eyes blaze even brighter. Imani looked up, and in that instant, time seemed to stop for her. She had waited 18 years for this day, the day the magic of the Azura bloodline would surface. In her daughter's golden eyes, she saw Ayana's reflection, saw white-crested waves, saw the throne shining deep within the sea. But instead of letting her worry show, Imani let a gentle smile spread across her lips. She stepped closer, placed her hand on Zahara's shoulder, as if to steady her with calm. Her voice was soft, yet carried an unshakable strength. She told her, "You're special, and everything will be all right." Inside, Imani knew that all right was nothing more than a thin wall hiding the storm already forming. The golden eyes were not just a sign of maturity, they were the ocean's call, a call that could not be ignored. Their appearance meant the forces beneath the waves would sense it too, and the one who had once tried to destroy this child would not remain still. Zahara didn't fully understand what was happening, but she felt a profound shift. From the moment she had seen herself in the mirror, every sound and movement around her seemed sharper. She could hear the waves in the distance, though the windows were shut. She could smell the salt of the sea in the air, though their home was a full block from the harbor. And more than anything, she felt a second pulse inside her chest, not from her heart, but from the ocean itself. Imani turned away, hiding the weight in her eyes. She knew that from this day forward, their peaceful days would be counted on one hand. But she also knew Zahara needed time to walk toward that path herself, not be dragged into it in fear. So she chose silence, holding back the truth of her daughter's identity a little longer. Outside, the Charleston sky was clear and blue, as if nothing had changed. But for Zahara, an invisible door had just opened, leading to a world she had never known, a world waiting for her, calling her name with every beat of the tide. And deep beneath the ocean, someone had already sensed it. He smiled coldly, knowing the game had just begun. Night fell over Charleston like a sheet of black velvet, soaked through with the damp breath of the sea. On the second-floor balcony, Zahara sat in silence, knees drawn tight to her chest, her eyes fixed on the vast open water. The ocean beyond was dark and fathomless, yet the ripples catching the silver moonlight looked like beckoning hands pulling her toward a place she had never set foot in, but that felt strangely, hauntingly familiar. The sound of waves crashing against the shore came back in a steady rhythm, like distant drums beating from deep within the earth, calling her name in a language that did not belong to humankind. The sea breeze swept through her hair, carrying with it the brine stronger and sharper than ever before. She closed her eyes, and the images that surfaced were not of Charleston's harbor or its anchored boats, but of towering coral columns, pearl palaces glowing in the deep, and voices singing from unseen mouths. The sensation was both wondrous and frightening, as though an invisible door had opened in her mind, inviting her in without the need for a key. Far below, miles beneath the waves, Malik, the one who had once borne royal blood but been cast aside by fate, sat in the cold, shadowed great hall of Azura's palace. The water around him shifted, signaling a change. From the makeshift throne he had claimed, Malik felt a current of warmth surge from the land above, like an incoming tide. It was the magic he had awaited for nearly 2 decades, the signal that the child once hidden away had now come of age. His lips curled into a cold smile, his eyes flashing with the sharp gleam of a man who had planned every move in advance. On the balcony, Zahara opened her eyes, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't name. She felt as though someone were watching her not from the empty street below, but from somewhere far away, somewhere deep. A pressure, like invisible waves curling around her ankles, tugged her toward the ocean. She stood, gripping the railing tightly, forcing herself to take a deep breath to shake off the feeling. But with every breath, the scent of salt grew stronger, the whispers of the waves clearer, calling her name urgent, unyielding. Inside, Imani stood in the doorway, watching her daughter. She knew exactly what was happening. The day Zahara's eyes had changed color, she had realized that time was running short. From now on, with every full moon, the pull of the sea would grow stronger until the moment her daughter would have to choose. But Imani wasn't ready to speak the truth, not because she feared Zahara, but because she feared this human world would feel too fragile if the girl knew she belonged to 2 worlds. Beneath the sea, Malik was already making preparations. He summoned his most loyal lieutenants, ordering them to send the finest trackers to trace the trail of magic newly awakened. He knew he could not allow the rightful heir to Azura's throne to emerge and dismantle the power he had built through cunning and deceit. That night, the entire ocean seemed to stir, the currents shifting course, carrying his threat closer to the shore. Zahara stood there still, caught between the wind and the waves, her mind tangled with questions that had no answers. Why did she feel as though she was losing control? Why did the ocean, which she had always thought of as the calm backdrop to her life, now feel like a stranger earnestly calling her home? And if she stepped through this invisible door, what would she find on the other side? Out beyond the breakers, the moonlight spilled over the water, forming a silver path that stretched from the shore to the horizon. For a fleeting moment, Zahara thought she saw the silhouette of a city beneath the waves, its lights flickering like faraway lanterns. She blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the sea and the night. But the feeling remained, deep and insistent. Imani knew this night was only the beginning. What was coming would force Zahara to face a choice she had once prayed her daughter would never have to make. And somewhere beneath the sea, Malik was ready for the confrontation he believed would decide who truly deserved to rule Azura. Do you think Zahara will heed the call of the ocean, or fight it to keep the life she loves? And what will happen when her enemy finally comes for her? That night, Zahara remained on the balcony, her golden eyes glowing in the dark, listening to the waves as if they were whispers of fate. The ocean stretched before her, vast and mysterious like the unanswered questions lingering in her heart. Behind her, Imani stood in silence, knowing her daughter stood at the threshold of a journey she could not escape. Far below, Malik was ready, and the sea was waiting for its heir to return. This story is far from over. It is only the beginning of a journey where every step will test courage, faith, and love. From the story of Zahara and Imani, we see that love is not only about protecting someone from danger, it is about giving them the strength to face their destiny. Sometimes, life brings us before a great door, and only when we dare to step through do we discover who we truly are. What lies beyond may be a storm, or it may be light, and sometimes it is both. If you want to know whether Zahara will choose the ocean or stay in the human world, let me know in the comments below. Like this video, share the story with your friends, and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. I want to hear your thoughts. Can love triumph over every scheme, or will there be sacrifices that cannot be avoided? Together, we will find the answer.